She say, Miss Celie, you better hush. God might hear you. Let him hear me, I say. If he ever listened to poor coloured women, the world would be a different place, I can tell you. That is a line taken from the Pulitzer Prize winning novel of 1983, the book that I'm going to be discussing today, The Colour Purple by Alice Walker. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of a novel review, the book podcast. Thanks so much for wandering into my little corner of the podcasting or YouTubing world. Whichever way you've come to me, I greatly appreciate it. Today, I am rounding out the United States of America for my World Book Tour. The month of July is coming to an end, and today's book is The Colour Purple by Alice Walker. If this is your first time joining me and you're wondering what I mean by a World Book Tour, every month for 2025, I am traveling to a different country through books and reading two books from that respective country, just to get an insight into, well, hopefully get an insight into what their society's like, what their culture's like, what's it like being in that particular part of the world. I've already been to some fantastic countries. The year's just going by very, very quickly. I can't believe I'm already at the end of United States of America at the end of July. The first book I did was Blood Meridian by Cormack, McCarthy, so go check that episode out if you're interested, and go peruse the other episodes for the World Book Tour as well. These second episodes of the month are always my favorite because I get to talk about the books in isolation, The Colour Purple today, but then of course I compare the pair and see if there's any similarities that I noticed. From the offset I can say there's not many similarities, but there is one similarity that I noticed that I think is quite interesting, so I'll get to that at the end. And then I'm also going to announce which country I'm off to next, so make sure you hang around for that. A bit of housekeeping, if you would like to like and subscribe, I'd greatly appreciate that. But as always, it is a free book podcast, so please just enjoy the show. Okay, let's crack on with the episode. I've got my notes, I've got my book, and wow, what a book it is. I mean, this book really did take me by surprise. I didn't not expect it to be great, but I didn't expect it to be this great. I mean, I'd heard of the book before. I'd never read any other Alice Walker. I actually don't even know if she's written anything else. I'd just heard of The Colour Purple. It's one of those books that it's just kind of like on lists here and there. Top 100 books of the 20th century kind of list, those kind of lists. And I mean, it just really took me by surprise. It was a near perfect novel. It was absolutely outstanding. I mean, it's incredibly short for how much is packed in, around 260 pages. For the amount of information and the amount of stories and emotion that is packed into those 260 pages, it is nearly flawless. I thought the writing was fantastic. I thought the story was fantastic. It is told epistolary, so it is told through letters, which I think really adds a wonderful element to the story because it means that the language is kept incredibly effective. It's incredibly simple. It's incredibly deep. The story is then incredibly swift. You know, you don't want to overwrite letters because this is being written in a time when, you know, individual pieces of paper cost money, ink costs money. So you want to keep the story, or at least your letters, relatively tight. And that means the story is kept tight. Letters also aren't that long, so the chapters aren't that long. So it sort of keeps you turning the pages. Not that it's like a thriller of a story or anything like that. It's not like you're being left on cliffhangers or anything like that keeps you turning the pages, but it just keeps it really, really fresh. And it also just means that the story doesn't feel like it's overwritten at all. You know, they are incredibly tight. And then there's a wonderful subtext to the story that's going on in sort of if you dive into the depth of what the letters are actually talking about, there is kind of like two stories I feel here. There's like the surface level story of just what's going on, but then there's everything underneath the surface, which made it a really complex read. And it's, you know, off the bat, I'm going to say it's worth a second read. Absolutely. I'm definitely going to read it at least one more time in my life because yeah, I think there's a lot that went on here that I probably didn't pick up on just because it's hidden below the surface, and it's very much a novel, and this is very much a time when there's as much going on that isn't said as is said, and so you have to kind of read between the lines here and there. So I think I better do a brief overview. It's about two sisters, Nettie and Celie, and they are, for one reason or another, separated, and so they're writing letters to each other. And it's basically their experiences going on in different parts of the world. Celie is in an abusive relationship, writing to her sister Nettie, who has run away from home to escape sort of the abuse that accompanies the domestic life in America, in the United States of America at this particular point in time. And she has joined a mission to Africa. And it's kind of their experiences. And there's so much more going on, but that's an incredibly brief overview. I'm going to say there was one huge issue I took with this book, And it's not that big an issue, but it just kind of removed a very big emotional scene from really having a great impact upon me. On the back of the book, it does say that it is told through a series of letters spanning 20 years, first from Celie to God and then between the two sisters, which on the surface doesn't present as anything outwardly strange or anything like that. But then when you start reading the book, Celie is in this abusive relationship and she's writing these letters, and there's a very brief line, I think it was page like 37 or something, where she says Nettie is dead. And she's kind of conceded that Nettie has died because she's not receiving any letters from her. And I guess this is a spoiler, but it's not a spoiler. Nettie isn't actually dead. And the reason I think I'm annoyed is because the motives behind finding out that Nettie wasn't actually dead is a huge scene and really is a very telling scene for one particular character. And that is just completely removed because on the back, I know that Nettie isn't dead because, the story spans 20 years and is told between letters between the two sisters. And so having that sort of on the back of the book just really removed me from that emotional scene, because when you do find out that Nettie is alive and why the letters haven't been delivered to Celie, it is an incredibly dark scene, I felt, but the emotional intensity behind it just wasn't really there for me because I kind of basically already knew that Nettie was alive. So that is really my only overt criticism of the book, is that huge scene and a really big scene for painting this particular character in a really dark way. It was just completely removed for me and I already knew it was coming. That being said, it could just be my version of the book. I'll hold it up for the benefit of those on YouTube. It might just be this particular book that uses this particular blurb. I don't know, but basically that was my only real criticism of the story. Now just getting into the bones of the story, I think something that really caught me off guard and was not what I was expecting was what the story felt like it was really about. I guess picking up a story like this, I imagined it was going to present itself as a book motivated by race, and it's about black women living in the United States of America in the 1900s, in the early 1900s, and so you kind of start to imagine a picture of what it's about. But what I found is, and this was just my read, I found it was really a story about women's rights more so than the race of the women themselves. That's not to say that the race doesn't play an important part in the story, that race isn't an important part in the story, and that things aren't racially motivated in the story. But I found it was really about women and women's rights and roles in society. It's kind of this idea of, it presents the United States as being this really civilized but also uncivilized society, because women are really just treated like they're incredibly dehumanized. Actually, the women suffer. They're the carers of the family. They're the sex slaves of the family. There's a lot of rape that goes on in this story. Women's feelings, thoughts, emotions aren't really taken into account. So I think it was page 37, like I said, when we get the line "Nettie is dead," it's incredibly brief. It's literally, I think it's just those 3 words, and then the story keeps moving on. And it's an incredibly big scene for Celie to just brush across very swiftly like that. But I also felt it was almost perfect, because that feels like it captures the sentiments of what it's like to be a woman in this society, and that you have these huge emotional moments. My sister, the one person I truly love in this world, is dead. She gets 3 lines in this letter, and then we've got to move on. But there's no stopping for anything. My husband, who's abusive, isn't going to say, well, take a week off, take 2 weeks off, mourn the death of your sister. No, he's just going to continue beating her. He's just going to continue being emotionally abusive, physically abusive, sexually abusive. And so it really felt like it captured the dehumanization of women through the story. And so that's what I really felt like the story was about. It's the rights of women and the role of women within this society, in this civilized society, this quote unquote civilized society, and how they've pretty much been dehumanized, and the uncivilized nature of this civilized society to dehumanize other human beings. Even though this is a pretty dark and difficult read for a lot of passages, because like I said, there is a lot of abuse that goes on in these pages, I think Celie as a character is just a shining light in this story. She is such a wonderful character and a wonderful person to be following through this story. She is often described as this incredibly stupid person. She's often called dumb. She's the dumb sister. Nettie's the really intelligent one, but Celie's just the dumb sister. And it's said over and over and reinforced over and over. But through the course of the story, I actually found her incredibly emotionally intelligent in the way that she responds to things, in the way that she acts towards things, in the way that she characterizes people and learns from people and develops herself through the course of the story. I really did find her incredibly emotionally intelligent. So one instance is the man that she's married to, we never actually learn his last name. He's just called Mr. And then it's always just a line that follows to sort of say it's Mr. somebody. We learn that his first name is Albert, but it's Mr. somebody, and she always refers to him as Mr. and then, just this line. And it's this idea that this Mr., this Mr. in inverted commas, this Mr. captures a whole wealth of people during this time period that are incredibly abusive, both emotionally, physically, sexually, that just treat women like this. And through the course of the story, Celie really develops as a character and starts to find confidence within herself. And towards the end of the story, she's actually got a lot of confidence. She's got her own business. She's found a level of independence that she's quite comfortable with. And she starts calling this Mr. She starts calling him by his first name. She starts calling him Albert. And I found it really interesting for a few different reasons. One is that it felt to me that Celie really understood that this perhaps isn't an individual issue, the way she's being treated like this. It's not an individual issue in that Mr. isn't treating her poorly because he's necessarily a terrible person. It's almost as if Celie recognizes that this is a societal issue and that he's been raised in a society that perpetrates these terrible actions towards women, and she really kind of understands that. And it's really quite nice through the course of the story as Celie, finds her independence and her identity, I guess. She then becomes very forgiving almost forgiving towards Albert in the end, and she starts to use his first name. And it's kind of this idea that because Albert through the course of the story also goes through a transformation and starts to understand that he probably hasn't been the best bloke in the world, he starts to sort of separate himself from this society that's raised him in a very different way. And Celie kind of recognizes that in a really nice way and understands that, yes, you've been raised by this society, you've done some terrible things at the hands of this society, but you have started to learn and grow and develop. And she really kind of understands that, and she starts to use his first name, Albert, as if he's now, in her mind, got an identity himself. And I found it this really nice duality between the two because, yeah, it's just that idea that Celie kind of understands that this is a larger societal issue that's going on, and on an individual level, we aren't terrible people, but we're going to do terrible things. And sometimes those terrible things, we think we're doing the right thing because society's told us it's the right thing to do. And I think Celie sort of understands this in a way, and it just nicely sort of, the duality then between her at the start of the novel and the end of the novel, and the duality between her relationship with Mr. and then later Albert is really nice. And it's nice to see her develop and be constantly labeled this really dumb person, but her emotional intelligence and awareness are just so acutely aware and on display through the course of the story. Something I found interesting is that I was very much less concerned with Nettie's story through this book. I don't know if that's just because I was so heavily invested in Celie's point of view that I wasn't as interested in Nettie. I mean, I very much feel like Celie is the main character. She's the one whose letters we have most of the time, but we do get letters from Nettie as well. But I was very much just less concerned with her story on these missions. But what I did find is I really liked sort of another duality between Celie. The duality between Celie and Nettie's story is, Nettie's this really, intelligent character that goes off to join the missions. Nettie finds herself in Africa as part of this Olinka tribe that she's trying to help, and she finds that while trying to help this society, it's also just completely overrun by Christianity and the colonialist missions that come to Africa and just take complete advantage of these people. And I think the duality I really enjoyed was I didn't enjoy watching the colonialists come to Africa and completely take control and decimate it, but it was kind of on that side of the story. The Christian missions were coming in and taking control and completely subsuming these cultures that are going on. And on the other hand, in Africa, you had Celie, who's writing letters to Nettie and to God, completely find her independence and her freedom. And like that quote I read at the very beginning, how Celie says, if God had listened to the coloured women of this country, this would be a different place. But obviously he's not really listening to us because we're complaining, we're writing to him, and nothing's happening. And so she starts to understand that these people will subsume you unless you do anything. These people will just completely swallow you unless you stand up for yourself. And it was watching sort of on Nettie's side, her entire world be swallowed by the Christian missions, and then on Celie's side, her complete independence and rising up like a phoenix from the ashes, if you will, as she gained some independence and self-worth from these societal constraints that have been holding her back. So I mean, I think I'm probably going to leave it there. There's still so much that goes on in this story that I haven't even touched on. I know that, but it's just such a great book. I'm definitely going to reread it. I mean, what would I rate this out of 5? Honestly, it's probably up there, a 4.7, 4.8 even. It was damn fine story. I mean, it's a Pulitzer Prize winning novel. Sometimes you wonder with these, Pulitzer Prize or, Man Booker Prize winners, you wonder how they're going to hold up over time, and this one definitely holds up. It still packs such a punch, and it's still such an important story to read, so I would very much recommend it. The Color Purple by Alice Walker, 4.75 out of 5. Okay, so now it's time to rate the two books in comparison to each other, Cormac McCarthy's Blood Meridian and The Color Purple by Alice Walker. Normally I'm able to find some similarities between the books, some kind of societal similarities, and honestly they're two very different books. They're written from two very different times. One is about scalp hunters in the Wild West, and one is about black women surviving societal issues in the early 1900s. So two incredibly different stories. There was one similarity I found between, which I did find really, really interesting, is that they both don't use speech marks. And I mean, that's obviously a conscious choice by the writer. And I don't know, it was probably the only similarity I found, but I did find it incredibly interesting that they both chose not to do that. I mean, I know Cormac McCarthy doesn't like little black dots and lines and squiggles on his page, ruining the page in his view. I don't know why Alice Walker hasn't put in speech marks, but I did enjoy the fact that they both didn't use speech marks. So that was kind of cool. All in all, the United States of America, United States of America is a great place for literature. They've got some great writers. They've had some great writers. They're producing great writers now. It really is a great place that's produced some fantastic writers over the course of history. And these two books are no different. This was a fantastic month. It's probably, I'd say it's been my favorite month, maybe second favorite behind Nigeria, but yeah, definitely top 2 for me so far. Okay, so now where am I going next month? Next month, I am hopping on an aeroplane and jetting all the way across to China. One of these books was recommended by a friend. The other I found along my travels. They are Chronicle of a Blood Merchant by Yu Hua and Naked Earth by Eileen Chang. Both books look fantastic. I think what I'm finding is that I am absolutely loving the incredibly human stories. Blood Meridian was perhaps a bit fantastical, even though I absolutely love that. It's one of my favorite books of all time, but probably a bit fantastical, a bit mythological for the book world tour. Whereas Alice Walker's The Color Purple was incredibly human and felt incredibly real. And I think that's what I'm going to get through these two novels as well. Very incredible sort of on the ground, in the moment stories. They look incredibly interesting. One's about a man that donates blood and then finds out his wife cheated on him and had a child that he's now been raising. And the other is about two people sort of trying to figure out their place in a Maoist China. So that's incredibly exciting. Both look great. I'm really excited to get into that. Make sure you tune in for them next month. So here we are at the end of the episode. Thanks so much for listening all the way to the end. I really do appreciate it. If you would like to like and subscribe, I would greatly appreciate that too. But as always, it's a free podcast. So hopefully I will see you next week. Cheers, guys.